Welcome everyone to this Montana Book Festival event with a little help from my friends writing fictional friendships. My name is China Reavers. I am a volunteer host for the Montana Book Festival, and I want to welcome you, audience, into this virtual space. We're really excited to welcome Karen Bewley and Eileen Garvin to this year's virtual festival, but I want to first take care of a little housekeeping. We'd like to welcome you as attendees to submit your questions to our authors via the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to use the chat function to talk amongst yourselves while the event is taking place. On the back end, I will be monitoring both the Q&A and the chat for any logistical questions you may have throughout the event. The Montana Book Festival wishes to thank our event sponsors, Arts Missoula, Humanities Montana, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Whitefish Review, and MissoulaEvents.net. With that, I'd like to introduce you to our authors. Born in Missoula, Montana, Karen Bewley credits her roots to Butte, Montana, birthplace of her parents and her home throughout most of her childhood. She is the author of the novels Perimenopausal Women with Power Tools and Nanny on the Run. Her collection of nurses' stories, Nurses on the Run, Why They Come, Why They Stay, was chosen as a Best Books 2010 Awards finalist by USA Book News. Her essays have appeared in Family Circle, American Nurse Today, A Cup of Comfort for Nurses, Stories of Caring and Compassion, and Inside and Out, Women's Truths, Women's Stories. After a long and fulfilling nursing career, Karen traded the magic of birth for the magic of books and is a high school library assistant in Missoula. She lives by her motto, Dream Big and Dream Fierce, by Viola Davis. Born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, Eileen Garvin now lives in Hood River, Oregon, which is located on the south bank of the Columbia River near Mount Hood. She's been a freelance writer for more than 15 years, writing about travel, outdoor recreation, and small business for various online and print media outlets. Her work has appeared with PsychologyToday.com, The Oregonian, Travel Oregon, and Creative Nonfiction Magazine. Her memoir, How to Be a Sister, was published in 2010. The Music of Bees is her debut novel. The Montana Book Festival acknowledges that we are in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish Kootenai, Absaroka, and Cheyenne people. The Montana Book Festival strives and will continue to strive to help promote Indigenous voices as one of the ways our organization acknowledges and respects the Aboriginal peoples of Bozeman and across Montana. For those of you zooming in from outside of Bozeman, I encourage you to take a look at the link I just put in the chat, so that you too can learn whose Aboriginal territories you're currently occupying. Go ahead and let us know where you're zooming in from this afternoon. And with that, Karen Bewley and Eileen Garvin will share land acknowledgements from their homes.
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge that I'm in Missoula, Montana, in the Aboriginal territories of the Salish and Kalispel people.
Thank you. I'm Eileen. I'm in Hood River today, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Columbia River Gorge, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Yakima, Wasco, Wishram, Tenino, Cowlitz, Nez Perce, and Confederated Tribes of Umatilla.
Thank you for that. And with that, we'll start this event.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Karen.
Hello, Eileen.
It's great to see your face.
Likewise.
And happy Saturday to you. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about our books together. And we're going to start off with you. So for those folks listening who haven't had a chance to read Perimenopausal Women with Power Tools, which I love, could you give us just a brief description of what your book is about?
Sure. So my book is about 57-year-old Beth Jorgennson, and she struggles to reclaim her life a year after her husband's sudden death. And then a card upends the secret, and she struggles with wondering if she can stand going through this subsequent upheaval. And so Perimenopausal Women with Power Tools, I like to think about is about a novel that talks about love and loss, secrets and regrets, friendships and revelations, and identity and sort of renewal.
There's a lot of themes worth delving into there, and something I hadn't thought of until now is, can you explain the title a little bit?
Sure. So it originated 15 years ago. One of my friends, Amy Knutson, was a founding member of the Menopausal Women with Power Tools, and her group created and sold beautiful decorative gourds like the one that's over my shoulder. And she lives 70 miles from Missoula. And I remember thinking I loved the sounds of perimenopausal women with power tools. At that time, I had an intimate experience with perimenopause, but I knew nothing about power tools. Yet I thought someday I'd like to turn this into a book. So 5 years later, I was ready to plunge in. Amy and I made plans. I would spend some weekends at her home learning her craft. But then I discovered there was a lifelong learning center class beginning a couple of weeks later in Missoula. And so Andrew Oberg, the instructor, it was his inaugural class. It was this fortuitous timing. So I took his class, and I, like my characters, I made a mirror. Characters made mirrors or picture frames. And so that became the blueprint for the classes. And then there was a third piece that helped shape the story. As I was about to begin writing, I envisioned writing this book from 6 points of view. And it was a grandiose scheme. And I thought, I'll do this. And then I saw a tweet from literary agent Katie Shea, and her tweet said something like, I just received a manuscript with 6 points of view. Ah! And so that last piece got to me, and I thought, huh. And so I debated and ultimately decided to write this from a singular point of view, but that was the best serendipitous advice that I ever could have gotten. I think for me, 6 points of view would have been, I don't know that I would have finished the book.
Sure, but you definitely have at least 6 distinct personalities in this story, and I love how you just described that you took some of this from your own life and some of it from a friend's experience. And I think that's one of the most fun parts of writing, especially fiction, is sort of, we're like crows, we're gathering little shiny bits from here and there. And you may have had this experience too. I'll be reading something I wrote and think, oh gosh, that's funny. That's a joke I heard somebody make one time, and that reminds me of this person. You're not even conscious of it when you're doing it. But it's fun. It was fun to hear about the origin of the book for you. And so in this class, this fictional class that takes place in your book, maybe you could just, I don't want to give too much away, but maybe just talk a little bit about the different personalities, the people that Beth meets in this class.
Sure. So Beth, the book opens with Beth pulling into the parking lot of Home Resource, and the book is set in my hometown of Missoula. And when I started, I debated, do I fictionalize place, and then I did both ways, and I really like it better, and its authenticity. And so she struggles to get out of the car. So she gets in the car, she's coming off of this year of hibernation, and goes into the class, and then they have to do, Miles is the instructor, and he asks them to introduce themselves, and she thinks, oh, I'm not here for small talk. And then the class begins, and a man comes in and says, oh, I forgot to give you these refund requests to you. If people decide within the first hour that this isn't for them, they can leave, money back guarantee. So Beth decides she's going to duck out. And before that, though, they go around the table, and she starts and just kind of stumbles through her introduction. And then Corinne goes second. And initially, they're just talking about their woodworking experience. And so Corinne just said she, helped her dad in his shop a long time ago. And then the next person, Zoe, says she helped her friends make a deck, but she said, all I did was I gave the snacks and drinks. And so that was her background. Maria, who Beth decides is the youngest of the group, and Beth pegs her to be 20 something. Beth is 57. And Maria talks about she wants to help her husband with a cradle. And then Zoe says, I think she says, are you preggers? And Maria says, not yet. So that kind of tugs at Beth's heart. And then Therese introduces herself and said she wants to learn more about, she's had some experience with power tools and knows about drills. And Miles looks at the roster and back at Therese and says, are you related to Kate? And she said, she's my daughter. And Miles is a high school shop teacher, and Kate is her 17-year-old daughter, who's one of his stellar students. And so then there's this melancholy that Beth sees in Therese, and so she's wondering, what that's all about. But initially, she's going to duck out, and that changes when they go outside. There's a yard in Home Resource where there's all kinds of doors and PVC pipe and things. And Beth is planning to tell Miles on her way out that she's going to step away. And Zoe kind of catches up with her as they're heading out the door. And Zoe says, field trip, I love it. And that just kind of was the impetus that Beth needed to stay. And then, but she has this push-pull often throughout her story.
Yeah.
She's, reclaiming her life.
I really love that opening scene, the way all these folks are introduced, and Beth is so perceptive, and especially the way you just described, where she's picking up on what's happening with everybody in the room without a lot of conversation. And I think we'll probably we're going to eventually get to this, but there's a lot of similarities between Beth and my main character. And I was curious, this idea of, without giving anything away, she has been grieving and she's trying to make herself try a new thing. So, and almost from the get-go, she's in the car saying, what am I doing here? I need to get out of here. So what is it that makes her stay? What is it that makes her push through and stick with this class, do you think?
Well, so Zoe's bit made her stay the first night. And then Beth had planned she was not going to return the second night. But as Miles was looping them through the Home Resource Yard, he pointed out that there was this collection of old potting pots that you could deliver to Home Resource and people would buy. And Beth had tons in her garage. So she clears them out, puts them in her car, and thinks, well, I have those pots. I'm not staying for class. I'm just going to go early, drop off those pots. But I want to tell Miles that I'm not coming back. So she goes early. And Zoe, who was so anxious to get out of her house, shows up early too. And so she follows Beth into the classroom. And so Beth thinks, oh, okay, so one more night. I'll stay one more night.
And so she just kind of like lets herself get tugged in. And
right.
You and I were talking earlier about this. She becomes, with all of her, even though she keeps telling us as the reader, I don't want to do this, and I'm a loner, and I'm not going to stay. And she ends up, doing even more than that. And she becomes sort of the unlikely hub for all these women of different ages and life experiences. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that comes? How is she experience? Where does she find that within herself? Why does that emerge for her?
So, and that was one of the pieces I loved about this story, the kind of multi-generational pieces. And so her relationship with Maria starts. Beth finally talks herself into going to the library to get books about grief. And it's again a leap because she really has hibernated for this year. And so she goes to the library. She talks about she wants it to be surgical strike fast, get in, get out. Mm-hmm. And so as she's scanning, as she's about to scan her book, she hears this voice say, "Hi, Beth." And she looks up and she doesn't recognize who it is. And then Maria says, "Maria from woodworking." And Beth wants her to leave because she has these books that she doesn't want Maria to see as she scans them across the counter. One is called Good Grief, a novel. The other one is called I Wasn't Ready to Say Goodbye, something about sudden death. And Maria just stands there. So Beth looks at Maria's feet and, scans her books. And then Maria invites her to go to stop for coffee downstairs. There's a coffee shop. And again, it's this push-pull, but Beth says, okay, partly because saying no is a struggle. They get downstairs, the coffee shop is full, so she thinks, great. And then Maria says, we could walk to the Catalyst. So that relationship kind of unfolds. And then as the classmates decided to meet after class, Beth doesn't want to go, but Maria meets her gaze and she thinks, how can I say no to Maria? And so it's this baby step. And then Zoe says, let's get together once these classes end. And Beth just kind of blurts out, you can come to my house. And then she thinks,
what did I just say?
Yeah. And so she wants to like say, no.
Yeah.
And one of them says, will we be chasing your husband away? And Maria has learned the story from when they shared coffee and because she asked about the book titles. And so Beth then reveals, she lost her husband a year ago, and this is a huge, big stretch. So Tree says, come to my house. And then Beth says, no, come to mine. Because once that secret is out and people realize she's alone, and so she doesn't have to struggle with how is this going to come out, then she is able to say, okay, they can come. But then leading up to the event, she's like, oh my gosh. So
I love that. Maria, because she's so sympathetic to what she thinks again, she's not sure, she's just meeting her, but she's just Beth is very sensitive and compassionate in that way and is drawn in by her, and then it opens all these doors to these other relationships. And I really enjoyed watching those friendships develop. I wanted to ask you about, again, this is going back to the title of Perimenopause. There's a lot in this book about women's bodies, pregnancy and menopause, childbirth, infertility, and can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to discuss those elements of women's life in your story?
Sure. So it happened organically, but in essence, the book is about women, as you said. And I think one of the powers that we have as women have is we collect and carry these life experiences that we go through. We kind of move them along our trajectory. And then at times, other situations, kind of help us deep dive into what happens. Sometimes when we're going through the day-to-day, we don't even really realize what's going on. And Maria, again, was a conduit for those conversations because she's an OB nurse and she's trying to get pregnant. And she's the one that coins their name, Perimenopausal Women with Power Tools. Because the day that Beth's at the library getting grief books, Maria's getting books about infertility and early menopause. And the relationship, so Maria sort of is the conduit, but the writing is through Beth's point of view. And so Beth and Reed did not have children. And her parents are gone and she's an only child. And so there are all these layers of grief that she has. And then when she hears Maria's story, and it sort of pulls back Beth into some memories and longings that, she had really tucked away and went some that were painful to consider. But then she becomes hyper vigilant, thinking about Maria's and OB nurse working around these babies. And Beth starts noticing baby bumps on magazine covers and in grocery stores. And she thinks of Maria and how hard that must be, as Maria is sort of going through this struggle. So that there's some story threads through all those pieces, and with menopause and the changes that women go through and the bonding, those experiences bring us together. We bond and commiserate over these things that affect our lives and our bodies.
And I love that element of it. And it's one of those, it's something that, we women don't necessarily talk about, that that it's so easy for us to have these conversations. Here this group of strangers, and the first time they get together, the conversation just naturally goes to some of these elements and that's sort of a wonderful vulnerability that's available to women's conversations, that they end up sharing these things with each other without a lot of qualification, because everyone's has shared experience. I really enjoyed that. And I think I know you're going to do a short reading here, and I believe does this have to do with Kate, this one?
It does.
Do you want to set that up for us a little bit so we have a little context?
Sure. So Kate is one of my favorite characters. She's Teresa's daughter. I said a high school senior. For years, she wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And so in high school, she took woodworking classes. She thought, I'll practice on wood before, I'm working on bones. And then she grew to love woodworking, and Miles has been her teacher all 4 years. And so Therese, has shared that story with her classmates. And the first night the women gather at Beth's house, on Theresa's way out the door, she notices this wooden table, and she said, "Is this a shaker?" It was, and it was made by Reed, Beth's husband, he was very skilled woodworker. And so Beth kind of blurts out, if Kate wants to come over and use Reed's wood and shop, she can. And then again, she thinks, why did I say that? But that ends up happening. And so Kate and her grandpa Frank then end up spending time at Beth's in her kitchen and in Reed's shop. And Kate is really the driver of this woodworking project. And so this scene that I'm going to read from, it's one of those Saturday afternoons when Frank and Kate are at Beth's house. So I'm going to put the book here. 2 hours later, Beth joined her company in the breakfast nook. She savored a bite of the caramel rolls bakery fresh goodness. The sunlight streaming on Frank's hands awakened childhood memories of her dad, donuts, and sun-drenched California mornings. Shh. She glanced across the table. "Has your mom asked about your project?" "She asked how the bench was coming." Kate arched her eyebrows. "What did you say?" She leaned forward. "I told her we're making a surprise." Kate patted her cheeks. "I've never been good at telling lies, not that I want to be. I used to have a friend who lied all the time. She thought she was good, but she wasn't." "Do I know her?" Frank shifted in his seat. Kate nodded. "Savannah, she has dark hair and always wore cute dresses to my birthday parties. Remember that one?" "Nope." "Some of her lies were bald-faced, but a lot were lies of omission. You know what I mean? She didn't even think those fibs were lies. I think they're the worst." Kate speared a piece of her roll. "For a while, whenever she'd tell me anything, I'd think, whatever. But one day I told myself my trust was in the ditch." She grinned. "Remember how I used to say 'in the ditch' when we played cards?" Lies of omission. A chill ran down Beth's spine. Her shudder was so slight, she hoped no one noticed. She swigged her coffee. He gave a hearty laugh. "I do," instead of "in the hole." "What were you, about 4?" "Yep. That was the day you started calling me precocious." Kate winked. "Anyways, I decided life's too short to have a friend you can't trust. I stopped hanging out with Savannah in middle school, but I'm nice whenever I see her." "Sounds like you learned a lesson you could teach us grown-ups." Beth encircled her mug with her hands. "Maybe. Sorry about the life's too short." Kate held her gaze. "But I bet you didn't expect Reed to die when he did." "He didn't." Surprised and comforted by her candor, she glanced away. "Have you read The Fault in Our Stars or seen the movie?" Kate reached for her hot chocolate. Talk about life's too short. She shook her head. "I don't think I could get through either one." "Yeah, they're sad." "With a librarian mama, I bet you grew up with lots of books around your house." Beth studied her young friend. "Plus grandparents who love books." Kate tipped her head. "He and Grandma always give me at least one book with every present." "I learned to love to read from your grandma." Frank stroked his chin. "I don't think she would have married me otherwise." "What about you and Reed?" Kate lifted her last bite. "Reed read some, not as much as I do." She waved a hand. "The library was one of my favorite places as a kid. Still is." "Mine too." Kate glanced at her grandpa's empty plate. "Time to get back to work." She stacked her plate and mug. I'll get those. Beth reached for Frank's dishes. Your boss is calling. She's a taskmaster. He lowered his chin and raised his eyebrows. Someone has to be, Grandpa. Kate linked his arm and guided him out the door. Beth buried her head in her hands. Paralyzed by deceit, she sat without moving and then abandoned her knitting for the remainder of the afternoon.
Thanks, Karen. I
Sure.
really love that piece and how Kate, as a younger person, can sort of say things that somebody her mom's age wouldn't. You know, her like youthful and candor really allows her to communicate some things, and the way it moves the story along is really lovely. So thanks for sharing that. And where can people read more of your work, and where can people buy the book?
So they can buy the book Fact and Fiction. I think there's going to be a link maybe in the chat.
Oh, yes. Okay, I see. Yep. It's there.
And yeah, and books that are titles that are Montana Book Festival titles, 20% of any sales, including your book, Eileen, through Fact and Fiction, 20% of those monies go to the Montana Book Festival. And
Great. I don't think I knew that. So thanks for making that clear.
Oh, yes. So yeah. So any books that are bought through Missoula's Fact and Fiction, which is, a stellar sponsor of the book festival that has reciprocal relationships. Yeah, and the book's available online and in ebook form. And I have KarenBewley.com. So there's information and some of my other writing on there. So.
And your blog is on KarenBewley.com as well. Great. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah. And now let's hear about the music of bees. Can you tell us a bit about what your book is about?
Yes, I would love to. The Music of Bees is my debut novel, and it tells a story of three lonely strangers who meet by happenstance on a bee farm in Oregon. It's set in Hood River, which is where I live, and it's sort of my fictionalized version of the town. And the three people, three main characters of the story are there's Alice Holtzman, who's a middle-aged beekeeper and recent widow who works at the county planning department. And she's really kind of reeling from the unexpected loss of her husband, similar to your character. And she meets Jacob Stevenson, who is a recent high school graduate. And the first thing we learn about him is that he has the tallest mohawk in the history of Hood River Valley High School. And Jacob had an accident at a high school party right before graduation the prior year and is now using a wheelchair. He was born able-bodied, but he's in a wheelchair, and all his he was this young punk upstart, and all of his wonderful plans have been derailed. He's stuck at his parents' house, and he's really just at a loss for how to move forward in life. And the third member of this unlikely trio is Harry Stokes, who is 24. Doesn't seem like he has any obvious problems, but Harry has social anxiety. He sort of trusts the wrong people. He makes poor choices. And when we meet him, he has recently been in jail following some listening to the wrong friends. And he's originally from New York, and he sort of bumbled his way west and has been staying with his elderly great uncle up in the woods in BZ Corner, which is near Hood River. Gets hired by Alice to work as a part-time laborer on her farm. So those are the three troubled people in my story. They all come together around honeybees and beekeeping, which Alice has on her farm. And it's through the bees that this kind of unlikely friendship develops among the three of them. And they really help each other out. I don't think this is a spoiler alert because I believe it's on the jacket copy. The three of them really come together to unite against this bad pesticide company that comes to town and forms a contract with the county, and it's going to sort of decimate the local honeybee population. So it's an uplifting story, I'm told. And yeah, it was really a pleasure to write the book.
Oh, and a pleasure to read the book, and it is uplifting. And so could you tell us about the origin of your story and your characters?
Yes, I would love to. So my background is in creative nonfiction. My memoir is about growing up with my sister, and I like personal essay. I think you and I talked about that a little bit, and even my previous reporting for newspapers and magazines. It's all sort of dealt with an established, set of facts, and then the craft comes in figuring out how to convey that story. Fiction has never been this is not something I have a lot of experience with, but I've always wanted to write a novel, and this book came to me really out of nowhere. I was driving to a farm in the valley, Hood River Valley, to pick up a package of honeybees, and I should say I also am a backyard beekeeper, not to the extent that Alice is. She has multiple hives. I think she has 24 when the book starts, and I have 2 or 3 at a time. But I have a hive, and my hive had died the previous winter, so I was going to pick up a new package of bees on a spring evening, and I was driving out of town and was passed coming in the other direction by a young man in a wheelchair with a mohawk. And Hood River is a pretty small town, so I had never seen this guy before. And I was, he had this tremendous hairdo, and I noticed his wheelchair. And I remember noticing that he looked very fit. And Hood River is quite a sporty town. A lot of Olympians train here, a lot of Paralympians, and so I figured, that he must be an athlete. And then as we passed each other, the first line for the novel just popped into my head, which is Jacob Stevenson had the tallest mohawk in the history of Hood River Valley High School. And I was so taken by that. I know it happens to anyone who writes has had that experience. And I just pulled over and I scribbled it down and thought, I want to do something with that. And I picked up my bees and came home. And the next morning I got up and I started what I like to refer to as sort of a period of forced confinement, which sounds like Victorian pregnancy or something. But my dog had had ACL surgery the day before, and she had a 12-week recovery. And I had to sit with her and, in the beginning days, kind of like help her out to the bathroom with this little sling. And so I spent a lot of time sitting next to the puppy pen. And I just thought, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to work on this book. So I had 12 weeks of daily contact with the story. And I learned who Jacob was, and then Alice appeared, and then Harry, and then I just followed where they led me.
Oh, I love that. And bees, as I told you, as I'm driving to see my mother, I pass these beehives. And so I look at them from afar with this renewed appreciation, and they become characters in a way in your story. So can you tell us so you are a beekeeper, but can you talk a little bit more about bees and how they factor in?
Yes, I mean, I love to talk about bees, and I have to keep an eye on the clock so I don't talk too much about bees. Honeybees are really fascinating creatures, and I got a start. They're, for better or for worse, it's a pretty easy hobby to get into. You can buy a hive in the mail and put it together, and then pick up your bees from a local farmer or bee shop. And so I did that. I got my first hive in 2014. And really just the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. And in 2020, when I was revising this book, I was taking the Master Beekeeper Apprentice program here. It's a university extension program. So you're studying, it's this wonderful curriculum that's set up to walk you through the year of the bee and all the tasks you should be doing and everything there is to learn. And so then I ended up putting a lot of that stuff in the book as well. And just to give you some examples, learning about what distinguishes a worker bee from a drone and how the queen operates. There's one queen in every hive. She only lives 3 or 4 years, and she lays thousands of eggs a day. She can't feed herself. She can't clean herself. All she does is lay eggs. She only leaves the hive once to mate in an area where other drones show up. It's called a drone congregating area, which always sounds to me like the parking lot behind the 7-Eleven or something. And then she spends her life in the hive, just laying eggs. And the worker bees are all her daughters. They take care of her, they feed her, they clean her, and they really, everybody's got a task, whether it's feeding baby bees or cleaning up the hive, bringing honey in, bringing nectar in, making honey. It's just a fascinating collective where everybody's, each one of them is just working away, doing their thing until they die. And a honeybee only lives, here's some more honeybee trivia for you. They only live an average of 6 weeks, and each bee is responsible for between 1 and 2 teaspoons of honey in its lifetime. So think about that the next time you're, getting yourself a big scoop. They're incredibly efficient, hardworking little creatures. So I love reading about them. I love keeping my own hives, and I also love reading about it's led me to an interest in other pollinators. Honeybees are not native to North America, so all the rigmarole we go through to keep them alive. I'm sure in Montana, there's those hives that you're driving past. You might start to notice they look different for the winter. They might be wrapped in black paper. They might be reduced in size. There are all these things we try to do to keep them alive in the winter. And we're lucky to have them, and we're very dependent on them, but they're not from North America. So then, oh gosh, we have thousands of native pollinators. And the honeybees in my story are very directly threatened by a big ag company called Supergrow, which I made up. I made them up. It's easy to make a big corporate conglomerate a bad guy, but what's threatening honeybees is also threatening native pollinators all over the West and all over the country, and that's drought, habitat loss, global warming, and pesticide use, even in our own backyard gardening. So there's lots and lots to talk about with honeybees.
Well, I learned a lot from your book, and it was interesting. And you've talked a little bit about how Jay came to you and then the other characters, but in terms of writing your book, and you said fiction is a new venture for you. And so the process, people talk about, do you write with an outline? Do you write from the seat of your pants? And points of view, the structure of your story, I loved. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I love multiple points of view. So I don't know what that agent you were talking about was talking about. I love that. And I originally, I thought that Alice, Jake, and Harry would each have equal balance of point of view. I don't write with an outline. I write just from the seat of my pants. I do find that that each chapter sort of comes out all at once in sort of the same word count, which is a little bit weird. For some reason, my chapters are always around 4,000 words. But so I kind of just went for it. And then I noticed I had some chapters where I realized during the process of writing it that Alice was really going to need to take the lead on the story. And I had to be okay with the fact that it was going to be uneven. I had this idea in my mind that it was going to be a certain way, but you just have to sort of let it unfold. And it made sense that she had more stage time in a way, because she's older and she ends up, although she, like Beth, declares herself to be this introvert, doesn't want anyone around, she becomes this kind of den mother for these two lost boys without really wanting to. And it's Hood River she's lived here her whole life. She has a place in the community. So it worked to make her sort of in charge of things. And I don't outline, but I find it outlined useful after the fact. I think writing is a huge mess. that's one of the hardest things for me is I have this idea in my head that I want it to be this tidy operation where I sit down and it comes together and then I just sort of clean it up. And it never works like that. So I find outlining after the fact useful to go back and say, okay, what do I have here now? Who's talking in this chapter? Do I need to switch things around? Where can I clean it up? So yeah, I think that's, I think I answered your question.
You did. And there's a special bond that the characters have with sense of place and the land and home and Hood River. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I love it here. I've been here for 16 years and I grew up in Spokane. So the West is very much a part of me. And Hood River was an easy stage to set up for the story to play out upon. It's in the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area, and just geographically, there's some landmarks that make it really fun to play with. There's Mount Hood is 30 miles south of here. Mount Adams is 30 miles north of here. And if you look at an aerial map of the Pacific Northwest, it's in that string of Cascade volcanoes that kind of goes from Canada to California. The Columbia River forms the border between the two states, and Hood River is a pretty cute little town. It's kind of set on the hillside right by here. So it was I really love novels where I have a strong sense of place. I know the physical environment that the characters are acting in, and because I love this place so much, that was easy for me to write about. I've also done quite a bit of travel writing for the Oregon Department of Tourism, and so that kind of naturally, I think, crept into the story. I took a little bit of artistic license with the story because it's hard to explain. The Columbia River Gorge it's in Washington and it's in Oregon, and it's in the towns of Hood River, but also White Salmon and Bingen and Stevenson and the Dalles. And so I found myself like BZ Corner, which is where Harry lives in the trailer with his uncle. It's in Washington, but it was too cumbersome to explain up front. And I was sort of looking to go back to when you're talking about New York agents, I was thinking, okay, someone from New York is going to think like, Manhattan, this is the map of the states. There's Manhattan, there's the Midwest, there's California, and then everything else, so maybe I'll just simplify things. And so I present the whole story as taking place in Oregon, and I've received a little bit of flack from my friends and neighbors about that, but I think they're going to let me off the hook.
Oh, good, because it flows in the story. And so would you read a bit?
Sure. Yes, I will. I'd love to. I'm going to read a little bit to you from chapter 5, which is called Scent Fanning, which is something that bees do when they fan to try and smell the queen's pheromone when something alarming has happened. The pheromone is the scent that connects the hive together. And in this scene, Alice and Jake have met for the first time, and Alice has almost run him off the road. She was driving, she was distracted, and he was in his wheelchair at dusk on her road, which is not a high trafficked road. And so this is after she's crashed her truck into a fence post, and her bees are all over the place because she had a bunch of hives in the back of her truck. Okay, so I'm going to start here. And so Jake's sitting there. They've introduced themselves to each other, and she's trying to clean up her mess. In about 20 minutes, she'd collected all the frames and put the nukes back in some order. She was stung twice on her forearms. That couldn't be helped. She had to concentrate on the ones she could save. Alice returned to Jake, who was sitting up with his back against a rock. With that hair and his long legs, he looked like some sort of exotic bird. Alice reached down and grasped one side of the wheelchair, and the kid glared at her. She recoiled, embarrassed, and wondered how she'd offended him. "I thought I'd have a look at your chair," she said. His face relaxed, and the boy nodded. Alice righted the wheelchair and ran her flashlight along the side. She noticed scuffs, presumably from his fall, but when she spun the wheel, it seemed true, which was good. She could still hear the bees, though the buzz was receding. There must have been hundreds still flying in the air. The kid shifted against the rock and gazed past her. So they live in those boxes? Just temporarily, Alice said. They all have nice hives waiting for them at my house. Those boxes are for the commuter's cage, like a cattle truck, she said, now surveying the left side of the wheelchair, which seemed unmarred. How did they get back in? Jake asked. Do you use tiny cattle dogs, little lassos? She glanced at him and saw he was smiling again. Funny kid, she thought. Well, they'll go back in as soon as it gets dark and cold enough out here, she said. I need to give them a few minutes. Then I'll give you a ride home. No rush, he said. Look, I'd feel better if I called your folks, though, Jake, really. He sighed and pulled his phone out of his pocket. It's fine, he said. I got it. He thumbed a message into his phone. Done, he said, and smiled. Thanks, she said. I don't want your parents to worry. I feel bad enough about all this. Alice tilted the chair to the right and spun the left wheel, which also moved freely and seemed true. She wasn't the best mechanic, but the wheelchair seemed okay. She would insist on paying for any repairs. Did you tune up a wheelchair like a bicycle, she wondered? Well, technically you didn't do anything. I fell over trying to get out of your way, so I'll just tell them you ran me off the road. Alice frowned, looking at the chair, and didn't reply. Was he trying to be funny? I'm fine, really, I was just... His voice trailed off and he looked past her at the truck. Then he shifted slightly to face her. About the bees, Alice, do you just wait until they get into those boxes? She nodded. Yep, they'll find their way back. They want to get home. What happens if they stay out after curfew? Does the mom bee lock the door? Alice set the chair aside but didn't look at him. If they don't get home before the temperature drops, they don't make it. What do you mean? Well, she said, if they don't make it back in the hive at night, then they die outside. It's too cold. She saw a look of concern cross his face, and it surprised her. She clicked off her flashlight. Most of them will be just fine. They're hardy, she said, wanting to reassure him. She was touched that a teenage boy might care about the fate of such small creatures. My dad always called them tough little broads, she said. He grinned at that and looked past her. So can they just go into any one of those boxes, he asked. Do you really want to know? He nodded. Alice looked up into the twilight at the small bee cloud buzzing over the truck. She loved the story of the bees, which was like a fairy tale. Even if you were a scientist or a religious person, there was no denying that the bees had real magic. A hive of 60,000 honeybees, she explained, had one queen, leader and mother to them all. And 97% of the other tiny golden bodies buzzing away in there were her daughters. The remaining handful was made up of males called drones. Daughters and sons recognized the queen by her scent, which was called her pheromone. The queen pheromone said, all is well. It said, we are together. It said, you belong here. From the time they emerged from their capped cells, those golden creatures knew exactly what to do. The daughters were called worker bees, Alice explained to Jake, as the light faded between them. The very first thing they did after hatching, when they were known as callow bees, was clean up the cell they were born in. Then they started taking care of the other baby bees, feeding them and capping larval cells and helping the other newly emerged callow bees learn how to contribute to the hive. She told Jake how workers got promoted up the ladder as they got older, moving forward toward the front door to receive nectar and pollen from the bees that flew around collecting out in the fields. Those were called foragers. Some workers eventually graduated to foraging or became guard bees, she explained. Guard bees kept watch at the entrance and only let in the other bees that belonged there. How do they know? Jake asked. Who's who, I mean? They knew by the scent, Alice told him. As long as the queen was healthy and laying eggs, her pheromone kept them all united. If they had any worry, they would immediately stop what they were doing and expose the Nasanov gland in their abdomens, passing a distinctive lemony scent from bee to bee. The bees that foraged carried that smell too and brought it back to the hive. The scent allowed guard bees to identify them as residents and not as robbers. What do you mean, they rob each other? She nodded. Bees from hungry hives will steal honey, so everyone gets checked at the front door. Yellow jackets try to get in too. They'll actually eat larvae and eggs, carnivorous little bastards. Whoops, she thought, language. She glanced at her watch. How long had they been sitting there? She felt anxious to get the boy home. The buzzing had died down and a few bees remained in the air. Almost done as they're going to get anyway. Alice stood up, brushed off the seat of her overalls, and turned toward the truck. She didn't want the boy to see her face. It upset her to think about losing even one bee. She shivered, feeling the sudden drop in temperature that was common on April nights like this one. She turned to face Jake and the problem of getting him up, choosing, as she usually did, to be direct. Well, all right then, she said. Tell me how to help you get up and I'll drive you home.
Thank you. And I think we're, before we turn it over to Q&A, so tell us where people can read more of your work and
yes, well,
find your books.
People can get the book at Fact and Fiction, which thank you for reminding us that did you say 20% goes to support the festival?
Yes.
And
they need to say MBF in the as the code.
Okay, with the MBF code.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
People can also get my book. I'll plug my local store, Wakoma Bookstore. You can buy signed copies there from their website. And you can also get my memoir, How to Be a Sister, from there. I blog at eileengarvin.com.
Nice.
Yeah. So let's see. Let us look at our Q&A here. I'm looking in the chat. Hi.
Hi. So, and it doesn't look like we have any questions in our Q&A. I've been prodding the audience to see if anyone had anything. I think they've all been as captivated as I've been by the conversation, by your readings here today. I would just love to know what is probably the most challenging aspect for you when writing relationships. I think there's such a backbone of stories, and it would be great to know a little bit more about what hardships you have to endure when creating those bonds.
I'll go first, Karen, because I've been talking about my husband recently. I'm a very emotional person, and this is a surprise to me. I recently learned I'm not type A. I thought I was like this super type A organized person, and I'm not. Apparently, everyone around me knows this. But which is when I talked about the writing process wanting to be, very clean and super messy. This goes in the same category of self-discovery, I guess. And that what I noticed about writing relationships is that I feel it all. I really feel it all. And I'm writing something right now where my characters tend to have problems, big problems that they need to solve. And what they're experiencing in this case is nothing I've experienced personally, but I feel like I have to kind of inhabit their lives, and it can be sort of upsetting. And with Alice, Jake, and Harry, I don't think it's spoiling anything to say that it's an uplifting story. People have told me that, but they're all going through some heavy stuff, and there are parts of the book that I still can't get through without really feeling it. So that's what I find the biggest, and that's the fun of it too, right? Because you're inhabiting someone else's life by creating these disparate characters, or you hope to anyway. What about you, Karen?
Oh, so what you say, speaks true. And so throughout this process, when I would read scenes, and one of the things that was hard for me is the writing that I had done before. My previous novel was based on an experience I had. So I felt like I was working with a lump of clay. And then with this, I was writing from the seat of my pants, but I used to envision it as writing with a bucket of air. So there was nothing. And so that's why I think had I tried to embark upon 6 points of view, plus all their backstories, like Eileen, in your book, I loved, Harry and his uncle, and I loved Jake's friend Noah, and, the different characters. And there's other characters in my book, but they're not as well developed. And so learning character stories was a challenge for me. And one of the things that I did, both for Beth's sake and my sake, is at one of the gatherings when the women are first gathering for dinner at her home, they're talking a little bit about, what occupies your time. And often we think of that as like, what kind of work do we do, or, you know, what do we do throughout our days? And so they each sort of give this little sentence, and then one of them says, work talk stops here. Beth is newly retired. So I partly did that for Beth's sake, and also for my sake as a writer, like, oh my gosh, I don't know what all happens in their lives. And then one of them says, family talk stops here too. And again, Beth, she's a loner. You know, she has no family remaining. And so that was for both of our benefits. But that creative process was a challenge for me.
Deciding how much backstory to give and the like. Yeah.
And then just learn about the characters, you know, that takes time, or for me, it took time.
Thank you for that. And we do have a comment for Eileen. It's from Trisha. This is Mom, Eileen. Not a question. Not a question, but I've so enjoyed listening to each of you interviewing one another. What wonderful observations and questions. And I have to agree with that. This has been a wonderful experience with both of you here today. Thank you. And I'd also like to thank everyone who's been watching and participating. You've been great. I'd like to extend a thank you to our wonderful event sponsors, Arts Missoula, Humanities Montana, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, Whitefish Review, and MissoulaEvents.net. Just one more reminder that you can purchase the books by these authors and many other Montana Book Festival authors at Fact and Fiction Books. Be sure to enter the code MBF when you check out on their website, factandfictionbooks.com, or you can vocally say the code MBF if you're buying books in store. As these wonderful women mentioned, that allows 20% to go to the Montana Book Festival. I also urge you to purchase Montana Book Festival merchandise at montanabookfestival.com. There you can also donate so that we can continue our programming after the festival this year. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Oh, wait, really quick.
Oh,
We do have a question if you're okay with staying on.
oh, sure.
Karen. Yeah, I just wanted to it's from Kate Frazier. Sorry, we almost missed that, Kate. It's a question for Karen. Could you talk briefly about your writing process, the discipline of it, how you work through the process, keep it on track, etc. From your cousin Kate.
I'm gonna say that's my cousin Kate. Oh, so Kate, my up until recently, my job has been 5 hours a day, and 3 weeks ago I started working full-time in the library. And so having that balance of a 5-hour work day allowed time for writing in the morning and in the evening. And different tricks that I picked up that helped me in the process as I went along is, at times, like Eileen, when you talked about how you would read something and think, oh, that was something that somebody said. And if I heard pieces of conversation or dialogue, I used to write them down on scraps of paper, but then I learned to use my notepad in my phone, so my microphone. So in my notes, I would just like dictate notes. And so that helped my writing process. And it was just a matter of perseverance because this was a lengthy process. So as Kate knows, we come from good stock. Our moms are sisters. And so I think they instilled in us this ability to like power through. So with power tools or whatever. And Eileen, I loved hearing about worker bees. It's something that I say often, but then to really hear the origins of that gives, yeah.
Well, thank you to Kate and Patricia for sharing those questions / comments. And thank you again to Eileen and Karen for being here today and sharing your work with us. It's been wonderful. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.